This presentation came out of a recent board retreat held last Saturday at the home of Jeff Goltz, our treasurer. And we had some long-term and deep discernment that we were doing. Our board meetings are taken up with so much business and deep delving into continuing projects and interests that we kind of lost our way of what the bigger picture was. And Reverend Mary and Reverend Monica have really helped us discern what some of those things are. So some of the outcomes that we got from this retreat were we defined our portfolios of responsibility, what the minister does, what the board does, and we set our priorities and values for the year. And we were thinking about how to make values, portfolios, and priorities part of the board culture and calendar. We've always given the congregation, since I've been on the board, a list of key deliverables, which are things or projects. But the whole part of hope and joy and being emissaries for the future of OUUC, that was missing. So we hope that with this presentation and with this work that we've been doing, you'll kind of get on board with us about how great this place is and be excited about where it's going and feel inspired to help support it as we get on the train into the future. All right, we can start the presentation. Thank you. This is going to look really familiar. I've got even the wrong date on there. But run on through the slides. This is just your current officers. And about the board, I'm going to be reading from the slides, so if you can remove the text real quick. Thank you. All right. So we are elected by the members. We are responsible for governance, financial planning, and stewardship. And we are the leaders expressing long-term hope and optimism as emissaries for the future membership of OUUC. We meet every third Tuesday. We publish our agendas ahead of time. Now with the Tuesday meeting, the Tuesday blast, sometimes we miss that date, but all you need to do is to request a link from a board member, and that's why we gave you the list of the board members at the beginning of the presentation. Go ahead. All right, so some of the things that we were able to do. Yes, number 3, define the key areas of responsibility for the minister. We did some of that work in November, and we were there for 4 hours, 5 hours, and we ended up with lists that were 2 pages, tight-spaced both sides of the page long for the minister, and then 2 pages tight-spaced both sides of the page for the board. And a lot of those things, we've found at the end that a lot of those things could be categorized. Reverend Mary was able to see in her list 3 main areas of responsibility, and we were able to put many of the things on the board's list in 3 areas of responsibility for the board. And then this last one, determining a strategy to get it all done without losing our minds. I think it's important here. Reverend Mary brought up the book, is it 4,000 Weeks? In that we are human, living in a human world, and we cannot possibly please everyone all the time. And number 2, We cannot get everything done in 1 year. So how are we going to get done what needs to be done without losing our minds? We're going to fail. We're going to not please some folks. We're not going to be able to do projects in the way that folks think they should be done. But we are emissaries for the future membership of OUUC. We're taking care of what we have now, but we're also looking to the future. So let's go on ahead to the next slide. Some of the things in Minister's portfolio. Reverend Mary, would you like to speak to some of those things? I have your notes. And the notes that you gave me.
So from the really long list that the board and I put together in our retreat in November, I saw 3 big buckets that all of those duties can fit in from the minister. So there's a big bucket that's administration of a nonprofit, because a congregation is a nonprofit organization. And so the things in there you would recognize. The minister as the chief of staff, and so hiring and firing and staff supervision and direction and support and those kinds of things. There's the monitoring of the finances and, working with a bookkeeper and payroll and making sure taxes get paid, all of those kinds of things. Buildings and grounds would come under there, right? Then there's the spiritual life of the congregation. That's worship services, it's pastoral care, it's rites of passage like celebrations of life and recognizing life transitions like birth and death. And then there's the personal and professional spiritual development of the minister. So making sure that I get filled up and that I am cared for and care for myself so that I can care for the congregation as a whole. So do you have any questions about what those things look like? Who, exactly. And I'll just say, I know that when I arrived, there was some consternation about whether a minister could do administrative stuff. There was some worry that a minister couldn't do spiritual leadership and administration. And I'll just say that the expectation of ministers, UU ministers, is that we do both. The real question is, do we have enough support with volunteers and staff in order to make sure all those things get done? Because in a congregation this size, the minister isn't going to do all those things. The minister is responsible to make sure that they get done. And that's another layer of conversation that really there wasn't time to have happen here with the governance change that happened 10 years ago now. So it's time to have those conversations again.
Thank you, Reverend Mary. Thank you, Reverend Mary. I am so grateful that I asked you to come up because you did such a lovely, complete job of filling out these 3 areas. Onto the board's portfolio. We are responsible for reviewing and updating and following governance of the bylaws, the governing policies, and making sure that things that need to come before the congregation happen before the annual meeting, things that need congregational approval for change. We have fiduciary responsibilities, financial, building, not just taking care of the building, but building a plan to fund our operations. We have to maintain the integrity of our relationships and also make sure that we are funding our mission and vision, or we're doing our funding with our mission and vision first in mind. And then also each board member has responsibility for being an example of leadership. And let me look in here. We are to express long-term hope and optimism for OUUC and its stewardship. we're to be careful and to consider the culture change that's happened as we grow, and also to be emissaries for the future. So here is our giving tree, and I just want to show that long-range planning is in both portfolios, in the minister's portfolio and in the board's portfolio. This is a joint responsibility, and also it's a responsibility of the congregation as well. Our stewardship pledges and nonprofit giving are the leaves. Capital campaign is for large projects, major maintenance and major building projects. And then the legacy giving is for, it refers to gifts that are given as memorials, and when people mention OUUC in their wills, and also sometimes large gifts that are before people pass on. These are also handled by the Legacy Giving Committee. So, remember I mentioned before about trying to get it all done without losing our minds? Reverend Monica brought up that some of the congregations she's worked with have come up with a 4 or 5 year plan, a cycle, so that as things come up, there is a year that is dedicated. The board is going to put that to the top of their attention to work on that year. So we have not yet determined as a board for 2023-24 which one of these we're going to start with. But 1 year is going to be the focus on governance, which is making sure we have updated relevant policies and bylaws. Our manuals are all up to date, employee manuals that are the responsibility of Reverend Mary. And then the next year, congregational covenant. We've had, I've been through maybe 3 covenant rewrites where we do that deep discernment and write what we covenant to do in this congregation. 1 year is going to be focused on capital needs and campaign. So based on this cycle, we can expect to see a capital campaign once every 5 years for those large projects. We should just kind of get used to the idea of a capital campaign coming on a regular basis for a specific purpose. And then another year on our mission and vision. Now that happened when Reverend Mary came. She's been here 4 or 5 years. This is my 5th year. Her 5th year. So in a 5-year cycle, in another 5 years, it'll be time to look at that again. And then 1 full year for strategic planning for that long-term look. That can be financial planning, that can be succession planning, that can be planning for growth, all kinds of things. But it'll be a year that we focus on that. Now, all these things we address every year also, but the focus when we're going to take those big projects is going to be on a multi-year board cycle of review. So just to remind you of our current vision, a loving, just, and healthy world. We welcome and wonder, embrace and empower, bridge and become. So we are ready for questions. And I have board members here to answer your questions. Jeff Goltz is here, our treasurer. And I see Lee Doyle and Joe Joy and Eric Ness. So do you have any questions for our current board members?
Just one question. I've been on LDC this year, and part of the work of LDC is to help develop leadership training, and that's been a big conundrum. But one of the things that I wondered is, does the board have an orientation process now? So when new members come on the board, is there a formal orientation process?
No. I was oriented when James Trujillo was president.
Right.
And he had lists of handouts and the online UUA board member orientation and training for officers that I did. And then I have forwarded and made that list available to the new board members coming in.
Okay.
And then we get to know each other and plan our year at our retreat.
So I guess I'm going to bring this up to LDC tomorrow when we meet, but my question to you, to have the board consider, is right now there isn't a big appetite in the congregation for leadership training. Would it make more sense for LDC to focus on developing formal orientation both for LDC and the board to help with that? That's the question. So I don't need an answer right now, but I've been chewing on this for 6 months, so I've been trying to figure out how to make that work. Okay, thank you.
And I think that's one of the reasons I put in there that the board members are responsible to develop their leadership abilities. And that could include taking a class. It could be reading a book together. It could be doing some online. Now, some folks just hate online stuff, and I can suggest some of the best training in the world, and if someone doesn't want to do it, then.
But when you come onto the body.
When you come onto the body,
You need to have some sort of formal understanding of what's required, and that wasn't available.
got a question in the back.
Got to use the mic for online folks. I'm Keto. I use they, them pronouns.
Keto.
What is the board's overarching goal of this year, like of the 5-year cycle? I'm not sure what. I know you don't have it in a place yet. The word is lost in my brain.
Well, something that's been taking up a lot of time this year is governance.
Okay.
And Jeff, our treasurer, and Susan, our vice president, have been working a lot on governance and policy, and with the help of folks in the congregation, including Fritz Reedy.
Fabulous. Thank you.
And if I might just add, to offer my thanks to the board for focus on governance. From my perspective as your minister, coming into a system where there had been a governance change about 5 years before I arrived, and then a whole bunch of transition during that time. It didn't take me long to realize that you all really hadn't made the transition to the new governance model, and you maybe didn't know that. And then we went into COVID, right? So really this congregation has been in transition for almost 10 years. And so now it's time to get back into, so what did we mean with this governance shift, and what was our vision, and why did we do it, and what do we hope for, and how are we going to make it work? And so I'm really appreciative to the board that this board has been willing to begin that conversation again, because it's much needed. There's a lot of confusion in the congregation, and honestly, there's confusion with your minister as well.
I'm a money kind of person, so I'm curious to know, in general, what's the financial health of the congregation? What are the fear points coming up, and what are the positive points coming up?
Sure. So I'm Jeff Goldson. I was, in a moment of weakness, I agreed to be treasurer a year and a half ago. But actually, I'm happy to do it. It's really important. And so it was the best of times. It was the worst of times. I mean, it was really, there's some really good, positive news. We are out of debt. Zero debt. I mean, I don't know how many congregations can say that, how many organizations can say that. You know, we own the building, debt-free, all that. We've had a very successful capital campaign that was inspired in substantial part by a series of very generous gifts or bequests from George Lanning. So the facility that for years was sort of ignored because it was new and then not quite so new, and then it kind of migrated into being old. You know, we fixed the HVAC system. There's parking lot, you know, less visible things like gutters, parking lot, preservation, fixing, and then a sidewalk. And we still have money in the bank or coming in still from the capital campaign to pay for some future projects. Recall that there was a reserve study done that sort of surveyed all the capital facilities we have and forecast the needs going out like 20 years or so, 30 years, and sort of put us on a very tentative timetable for doing that. Now, those aren't all funded by any means, but a couple more are or will be. So that's really good news. Now, but we've hit some tough times, and I think coinciding with COVID, you know, we were just buzzing along as a congregation. COVID hits, and then all of a sudden, we got a need for more expenses. And so, remember, it used to be Riley McLaughlin in the closet over there, or Jim Knutson years ago, and that was, you know, a piece of cake, right? No more. We're doing this thing online. Very important, especially important during COVID, when those of us didn't want to come here. So we had increase in expenses. The other thing that hit was inflation, partly caused to COVID, but inflation since the beginning of COVID has gone up 20% at least, and that means staff are underpaid, you know, paper, toner, coffee, everything goes up. The third thing that has happened, is that our pledge revenues are relatively flat. I mean, relatively isn't really true, very flat. So in the last 8 or 9 years, the pledge level for this past year, our current fiscal year, is exactly about within like $500 of the pledge level of the one 9 years ago. It's been flat. Now, the 9-10 years before that, our pledge levels had doubled. So you can imagine a graph that goes up, flat for 9 years. So the result of that was we had a shortfall. We made up for that for some time with by the help of the federal government with PPP loans that were forgiven. But then since that time, we still have inflation, we still have increased staff expenses, but we had to use some one-time money to make up that difference. So for the current fiscal year, our budgeted expenditures are about $50,000 more than our budgeted revenues. It's made up with one-time money. So going forward, we've got some challenges to do that. So if the pledge level continues to be flat and we continue to have inflation, then we've got some things. I think you said like a fear spot. Well, that's my fear spot. Yeah.
That probably doesn't include the commitments made during the capital campaign when you're talking about your pledge. Our pledge levels have been flat.
Right, the annual pledge is all I'm talking about. I mean, if you were to graph all the donations from the church, it's great. You know, it's great.
So I'll just add, and I see your hand, Bernie, I'll be right over there. I'll just add that growth and then plateau, that's a really common thing in congregations. And so then the conversation for the congregation is, what do we do about the plateau? And my suggestion to the board, they don't know this yet, but my suggestion to the board for this next year is that the congregation have an intentional year-long conversation about growth. Does the congregation want to grow? that is an open question, I'll tell you. There's lots of a variety of opinions about that. And so then if the answer is yes, what's going to be required? What's going to need to change for the congregation to grow and for us to break the plateau? The congregation can stay at a plateau for a long time. There are some consequences to that as well, and that really is the conversation.
Nobody's ever accused me of having a soft voice.
They can't hear you online, Bernie. Bernie, they can't hear you online. That's
Oh,
the
I
issue.
see.
Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me online? Yes. Okay, it's just a quick question. I wanted to ask, well, you've been here 5 years. You have a dual role, administrative and spiritual, and I just wondered if you could give, hopefully a relatively brief response as to whether that's been difficult and how you've grown through it.
Wow.
Like 25 words or less, Bernie, is that a? Make it 50 words. Yeah, so I have grown a lot here, and one of the surprises that I experienced is how much I would be invited into my own personal growth and sometimes challenged in my own personal growth in response to the congregation and the things that come up here. And it's been really enriching, and I feel like I've had good support to be able to do that. I think the most challenging thing for me here has been what I experienced as a disconnect between the image of the congregation, the self-identity of the congregation, and what I experienced of the congregation. And an example of that is in the search packet that you all used in Search for Me, it said, "We've implemented policy governance, we're almost done." Right? Yeah, and I don't think it was a lie. I think you all thought that's where you were. And it was like, oh my goodness, no. And so it's a hard thing as a new minister to say, yeah, not quite there, and there's some things. And it's hard to challenge the self-identity. I also have experienced a lot of grief here from Arthur's time. And, there are still sentences that begin with when Arthur was here. And Arthur's been gone 10 years now. And so there's some question, I think, about, so what's missing? What are y'all missing from that time? We're not going to go back there again. And how do we move forward? And how do we, what do I want to say? How do we re-enliven the things that you miss from that time without believing that we'll go back to that time, if you will? So I hear things like, I want pride in what my congregation does for justice. I want us to be in the newspaper again. I want to feel like I'm a part of something bigger. Those are the conversations we can have about how do we create that again, or how are we creating that now? So I don't know if that answers your question, Bernie, but that's what I would say.
I don't know if this is for the board or Reverend Mary, but so the thought of growth and do we want to grow, I always struggle with that. Could somebody maybe help me figure out the difference between being open to growth and welcoming to be here for people that we would feel a benefit here, and like trying to grow?
What a great question, Karen, and I think we can certainly talk more about this in conversations. So my impression is that this congregation has experienced organic growth and I'm talking growth in numbers, because there's lots of different ways to grow. The UUA says there's 5 different ways for a congregation to grow, but I'm talking about numbers. And so during the years that Arthur was here, y'all just grew, right? You just grew. You didn't have to do anything. People just showed up and you grew. Well, that can't last forever, and it didn't last forever. There's a plateau that comes. And so the reflection then is, what contributed to the plateau, and if we want to grow, what's preventing us from growing now? So there's some pressure points that I think are preventing growth. One is the building. And another is, we're still figuring out how to invite folks who are participating virtually into the community. And I mean, nobody's figured out the hybrid stuff totally yet. So we have to, what does it mean then to have, 90 people online on a Sunday morning? And how do we, feel like we know each other and that we're part of community then? There's some cultural stuff about how we welcome people. The use of pronouns, that's not just I made that up. That's if we want to welcome young people, we got to get used to doing that. There's how do we create space that's welcoming for families and for children. I've shared with the board and others that it's not Sunday morning, it's Thursday evenings that we're welcoming families and kids. And so it might not be that it's so much Sunday morning anymore, although we're not going to stop those things. So those are the things that really there's a conversation about what needs to change. So if the expectation is that we can just exist and it'll organically grow, that's probably not going to happen anymore because of the plateau that we've reached in membership and in funding. Does that answer your question? You want to say more? Okay.
I kind of want to add on to what Reverend Mary is saying, talking about growing and not growing or whatever. I have news for everybody here. Y'all don't live forever. So I have a kid who's really not interested in coming because there's really nothing for him here. There's a lack of family, youth, and children program development because everybody here is retired. So you guys just get to show up and have a good time and go home. Also with outreach programs, if those are on, like Thursday as an outreach program, it's not specifically spiritual, but those need volunteers. And then that's where this choice comes in, is are we willing to put in the work and the volunteerism to develop these programs, to have the people in place, to be welcoming to families? And that's where that choice is, because I shared again that there was a church that I went to that wasn't prepared for kids, and then really went the extra mile to make me feel welcome in that space. That there is a resistance to change in programming here. I actually have been here for 1 year longer than Mary. People don't know that because I was hiding. And that's, I've met a lot of nice people, but there are still people here that are resistant to change. There's still people resistant to they, them pronouns. There's still people resistant to, we're being too welcoming. We're just welcoming everybody now. What does that mean? Apparently those people exist in every community and every religious church because they're still here. But anyway, so need volunteers, need work, and making that choice.
Thank you, Alex. And if I might just give an example from our children and youth programs to highlight what Alex said. So before COVID, we were struggling with getting volunteers to help with the children's programming on Sunday mornings. And Reverend Sarah tells me that this had been a challenge for years, right? So boom, we shut down. We're online for several years. And then coming back, the conversation was, do we even try to recruit teachers and volunteers for Sunday morning? And we decided no. So what we're doing now is we're paying our youth to be RE assistants in the classes on Sunday morning, and we pay our youth to staff the nursery. Well, that's an impact on the budget, right? So there's more hours, and we also made the justice decision to pay our youth minimum wage, which we were not doing before. So again, that's an impact on the budget. So in order to welcome families and have a place where parents can have their children cared for, spiritually and otherwise, while they attend Sunday services or have their kids in here, there is a cost to that, right? And we have to be willing to say, well, yes, we think it's worth it, and we think it's welcoming in order to have that happen.
Are there any questions online? No? right, well, it's 10 after 12, and I thank you all very much for coming and contributing and listening. And have a great rest of your day. Thank you. Thank you. You're welcome.